Mount Everest is the world's tallest mountain. It rises 29,000 feet above sea level, which is 2/3 of the way through the Earth's atmosphere. In the 1920s, for a 30-year period, 9 attempts were made to try to reach to the mountain's top and to place a flag there. Able to reach the top due to inadequate water supply. Therefore, John Hunt made sure that his team had an adequate water supply of a minimum 12 cups per day. Sure enough, on May 29th, 1953, this expedition became the first to plant its flag on the summit of the world's highest mountain. Truly, you might say that they have conquered this mountain. Truly, you can say that in a way, John Hunt looked and observed from all the previous teams and all the previous efforts that were made, and he observed and looked at Mount Everest and said, "Give me this mountain. I'm going to conquer this mountain one way or another. I'm going to find a solution to what it is that needs to be done. I'm not going to just look at the problem and kind of just shrug my shoulders and say, well, okay, 9 people were unable to do it, so I guess that means that I won't be able to do it." Well, he didn't look at it that way. Instead, he looked to find a solution. And he and his team, sure enough, conquered Mount Everest. The first team ever to conquer Mount Everest. And it reminds me a little bit of Joshua chapter 14, verse 12. In a similar way where Caleb tells Joshua to give me this mountain. Other versions may say, give me this hill country. And that brings our focus to this morning's lesson. More of a biographical type of sermon, we're going to study and look at the man Caleb. Caleb is a remarkable character. And honestly, not much is said about him, but we would like to know more about it. His name in Hebrew means all heart. All heart. And here in Joshua chapter 14, if you have your Bibles already open there, looking at verse 16 through 15, we find an incident in the life of Caleb that is greatly inspirational. And in order to appreciate this incident fully, one must be reminded of the background of what all is taking place here. So yes, this morning our text is going to be here from Joshua chapter 14, verse 6 through 15. But we're also going to kind of compare it along with Numbers chapter 13 and chapter 14, because that is where we get more of the background information. Caleb is a man with all heart. He truly is a remarkable character. Why? Well, for 3 reasons. Number 1, Caleb was a man full of courage. He was a man full of courage. When you look at verse 6 and 7 of Joshua 14, then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart." Okay, well, how do we see Caleb being a man full of courage? Well, it's because he had went on a mission. Right here, verse 6 and 7, he reminds Joshua of the mission that he, Joshua himself, as well as several others. He was part of a mission that became one of the most important events in Israel's history. Moses, at this time, had already led the people out of bondage. God had promised that the Israelites could move back into the land that he had promised their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes, that land flowing with milk and honey. They're going to be brought back into that land. That the promise was given many years, and now it's finally going to be fulfilled. They're going to have a taste of that sweet land flowing with milk and honey. But when they arrived there, there was a problem. Somebody was living in there. Uh-oh. Can you imagine just being able to return to your home after so many years and you find somebody living in there? But it's not just any type of people. Versions refer to these men as giants. Other versions refer to them as being mighty men. Now, I'm not going to be in the debate whether these were physical, literal giants or if it was a figure of speech saying that these were just very skilled, highly masterful warriors. Regardless, they were people that you just didn't want to mess with. And so I'm not going to spend my time arguing whether if it was either of those two. But in their eyes, they saw them as giants, whether literal or figurative. These were big men that they were mostly scared of. Somebody was living in there, these big giants, so the people of Israel had to go in and possess it. Therefore, plans needed to be made as to how they would proceed, which is what we find in Numbers chapter 13 as well as chapter 14. So hold your place here in Joshua 14 and turn back with me to the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 13. Numbers chapter 13, we read, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, 'Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them.' So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Haran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel." Look at verse 6. You see that from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. So Caleb was part of this group. Now, if you scroll down with me a little bit further to verse 17 through 20, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up into the Negeb and go up into the hill country and see what the land is and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So Caleb was selected from his tribe to help work out the details and to go spy out the land. They brought back, as we see, an accurate report of the prosperity of the land, including samples of the fruit, as you read in verse 23, 26, and 27. But the 10 spies, however, that were with Joshua and Caleb, brought back somewhat of a disappointing report, an evil report, for they saw the hindrances instead of the Lord's help. They looked at the problem instead of the solution. Look at verse 32 and 33. "These are the inheritance that Moses distributed in the plains of Moab, beyond the Jordan, east of Jericho. But to the tribe of Levi, Moses gave no inheritance. The Lord God of Israel, and their..." I'm reading Joshua. I apologize. Let me go back to Numbers here. "But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it.' Then the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are.' So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, 'The land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devour its inhabitants, and all people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.'" So it seems that, unfortunately, for the 10 other spies that were with Caleb and Joshua, their focus was a little bit too much on the problem. Way too much on the problem that they had forgotten who was on their side. Yes, they saw the problem ahead. They saw these giants, but they had totally forgotten how much bigger their God is. The Lord was with Caleb. That was how Caleb was able to take a good courage, just because he knew the Lord was on his side. He knew that the Lord was much bigger than all these problems and all these giants that stood before them in the land. For he says, back in Joshua chapter 14, verse 8 and 9, he says, "But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly follow the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God." Caleb and Joshua, as well, was different from the other men that were with him. Caleb said, "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome them." How so? Didn't you just see what I saw back there, Caleb? We're like grasshoppers to them. They're huge. They're mighty men. They're giants. Caleb probably just looked at them and just said, "Well, do you not know how much bigger your God is?" That is how I know that we're well able to overcome it. It's because we have him on our side. Caleb became the outspoken minority leader. His character and his courage were extremely demonstrated here from the text. He was a man of great zeal for the Lord. He was a man who was up and doing, always abounding in the work of the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58. His zeal is even more remarkable since he was probably not born into the Jewish family. Notice back at verse 6 of Joshua 14. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite. Pretty interesting. Kenizzite was not part of the Jewish family. He was a Kenizzite. He may have joined the children of Abraham before the enslavement of Israel, or he may have been a proselyte. Proselyte meaning a non-Jew who has been converted to the Jewish ways. So either way, he could have joined them before the enslavement or afterwards as a proselyte. Not much information that we have about that, but what we do know is that he was a Kenizzite, not part of God's Jewish family. And this reminds us of many converted to Christ today who have no family background in the faith, yet are more zealous than those who are Christians by generation rather than regeneration. But another thing that impresses us with Caleb is that he was more impressed with the Lord's ability to help than with the size of the giants that he saw. He recognized the dangers, for he saw the giants too, but he knew the Lord was with them. He was a man of great faith in that he never considered whether or not to do what God had commanded. He only considered what was the best way to obey the Lord. He stood for his convictions against his fellow travelers and was willing to take such a stand even though he had to stand alone. But necessarily Joshua was by his side too. Well, of course, from our perspective when we read it, we know that Joshua was faithful with him as well. But in Caleb's mind, he probably didn't know it at the time. He didn't know what Joshua was thinking. He couldn't speak on Joshua's behalf. He could only speak for himself. And he stood up for his convictions, even though he probably thought that he may have to stand alone. Caleb is a remarkable character, a wonderful man of God. Why? Because he was full of courage. How was Caleb able to conquer and to be given this mountain? was because he was a man full of courage. He knew the Lord was with him all the time. He knew that the Lord God Almighty was much bigger than any giant that he would ever have to face in his life. Let us be like Caleb, one who is full of courage. Number 2, Caleb's a remarkable character and a remarkable man of God because Caleb was full of confidence. We see that Caleb was full of confidence. Here's what I find very interesting with Caleb. Joshua chapter 14, verse 10 through 12. These 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength is now as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. So now give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke on that day, for you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord had said. Caleb was a man full of confidence, even in his old age. Even in his old age. We kind of often wondered, what kind of a person will he become later on in his life? How did he react to difficult circumstances later on in his life? How strong was he as a man later on in his life? Well, 7 years up to this point of Joshua 14, if you're looking at it from a timeline chronological perspective, 7 years had already passed after the crossing of the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. And yet, before all the enemies were driven out, they were casting lots for the land. This was a crucial time in their settling in Canaan, for it was a time ripe for envy and strife within the camp. And so what makes him a man with great confidence, even in his old age? Because he asked for the hardest job. He asked for the hardest job. Because by the time they returned back to that very same mountain that the Lord God promised to give him and his family, there were still people in it. So when the people of Israel, back in Numbers chapter 13, verse 14, complained and murmured against God and against Moses, they were faithless, did not trust in the Lord, they ended up having to go through the wilderness wandering for 40 years. They spied out the land for 40 days, and God told them, saying, your punishment for this, because of your murmuring, your grumbling, your complaining, your lack of faith, and lack of trust in me, because of this, each day that you spied out the land, I'm adding a year for it. So for 40 years, they had to wander in the wilderness. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall to see the kind of conversations that Caleb wanted to have with those people. We could have had that land right there, the land that we've been waiting for. But you just could not trust in the Lord. Now look at where we're at. So much for progress. I'm sure he was upset. But like I said, we don't have much information regarding that. But I'd like to be a fly on the wall to kind of hear some of the discussions that he would have with the people there. But anyways, after the 40 years, they returned, and now Caleb's 85. And there's still people in that same mountain. And yet he asks for the hardest job. Still give it to me. Give it to me. Give me this mountain. The Lord will be with me, and I will cast these people out. What's interesting is that with his age, of where he was at, he had the right to take it easy and could have demanded such. He was a full 20 years older than any other man there except Joshua, Numbers chapter 32, verse 11 and 12. He, with Joshua, Moses, and Aaron, had saved the people from complete destruction. Go back to Numbers chapter 14, verse 5 and 6. From a human viewpoint, he had every single right to have a lifetime retirement and to live off of his lifetime pension. He could have hoped that in drawing lots, he would get an easy inheritance. He asked to be an exception to the drawing of lots in the land. He reminded Joshua that Moses had promised him a certain area, the very hill country, the very mountain where they had seen the giants. And the giants were still there, yet he wanted it. He wanted it. Give it to me. I'm going to conquer it. I know the solution. I'm not going to fall back, or I'm not going to be like those 10 other spies that had a lack of faith, a lack of confidence, a lack of commitment, a lack of courage. No, I'm going to still remain the same as I was back in that time. Faithful and confident. Why? Because God is with me. God is with me. So give me this task. Give me this challenge. Give me this mountain, and I will fulfill it. He wanted the hard job. So in essence, in the way, he was saying that the younger man can have the easy task. He was able to accomplish this very task. Later on in chapter 15, verse 14 of Joshua, look what it says. And Caleb drove out, past tense. He accomplished it. Drove out from there the three sons of Anak, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. Right there, past tense. He accomplished his very task. Why can't we be like Caleb in the Lord's work? I would love to have Caleb here as a member of this very congregation. Too often people at times would want the easy tasks, the mixing mud tasks, as Brother Scott put it a couple weeks ago. Some would say, I want to find a lost soul, I want to convert a lost soul, but I would rather have the preacher or one of the other men or somebody else to do the actual Bible study for me, because that's too much for me. That makes me uneasy. That makes me not comfortable. I get too nervous. I'm not smart enough to know the books of the Bible or the passages of where to go as far as teaching them the plan of salvation or whatnot. All these different excuses that come up. And so often people would do that. They would throw it on somebody else. Others would agree to maybe teach a class, but they would rather have an easy class or an easy age group to teach. Some congregations want a preacher that is easy to listen to, who doesn't challenge them to actually look at the text, look at the context, and to apply it. They would rather have a preacher that just comes here, that does his job on a Sunday morning, a Sunday night, and Wednesday night, but doesn't give them any challenge to help grow the church or to apply certain lessons into their life. They just want to come here and that's it. Speaking of preachers, there are even some who want an easy, full-time position at a congregation where all of their needs are met. Where they have a house that's ready for them, they have benefits that are given to them, they have everything made out for them, they're comfortable. And yet, they don't want to take a task. They don't want to accept a position at a congregation that probably desperately needs a sound gospel preacher to help them grow. Caleb's taking the hard job was richly rewarding. This mountain range, Hebron, was rich in many ways. Number one, it was the burial place for Sarah. It was the place where she died. It was the place where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived most of their time. Later, Hebron was selected to be as one of the cities of refuge. Even later, Hebron would become the royal city where David would reign his first 7 years in his kingdom. Yes, this place was richly rewarding because it had many wonderful things about it. And folks, us taking the hard task is richly rewarding as well. Sure, not necessarily as far as physical rewarding, but yes, spiritually rewarding as well. Caleb was a man full of confidence. And thirdly, Caleb's a remarkable man of God because he was a man full of commitment. He was a man full of commitment. Look at the very ending of verse 12 through the end of the chapter. Caleb says, "It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord said." Then Joshua blessed him, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Caleb was a man full of commitment because he depended on the Lord for help. He depended on the Lord for help. He gave God the credit for his successes of the past, his survival in the wilderness, and his survival in 7 years of war in the land. When you go back and look at verse 10 and verse 11. He gave God for the credit of his wonderful, beautiful, physical health as well. He did not rely on his own physical strength. He did not depend on the men of Judah to come to his rescue, even though that they did. He wasn't expecting them to, and nor did he depend on them to come and rescue him, but eventually they did come to assist and to help him. He did not condition his request by saying, okay, well, only if Joshua would come with me. No. Instead, he looked to God. We should always look to God for help and succeed, rather than looking at our weaknesses and fail. He wholly followed the Lord. You know what the phrase wholly follow the Lord means? Well, it kind of gives you, when you look at the W-H-O-L, it kind of gives you the idea. It just comes from the word whole. He entirely, fully, completely followed the Lord, meaning that he followed him in all relationships, in all areas of life, whether it be the home, the business, the education, you name it. Every area of his life, the recreational times that he had, the hobbies that he had, every part of his life, he completely followed the Lord. You may have heard this illustration many times, and I'll go ahead and give it again. But remember that pie chart? The pie chart illustration? Your life is made up of a pie. It's separated and sliced into many areas that represent your life. Well, how does God fit in all those areas? Through being that cream filling within that pie. Allow God to be that cream filling, whatever type of favorite pie that you have, apple, pumpkin, blueberry, whatever it is. People love it. Why? Because of the cream filling in it. Let God be that cream filling that makes and completely fills all parts of your life. Jesus demands total commitment for you and I. Luke chapter 9, verse 59 and 60. Total commitment is the only acceptable service. Therefore, partial committed Christians are only miserable. So the question is, am I? Are you? Are you wholly following the Lord, the God of Israel? Or are you holding back? Caleb truly is a remarkable character, a remarkable man of God. And from this morning's lesson that we learned from Caleb, he was a man who was full of courage. He was a man full of confidence. Not confidence in himself, but confident in the Lord. He was a man who was fully committed to the Lord. May God give us men and women like Caleb. Let us learn from the great life that he lived. If you have any need whatsoever as far as the invitation being extended, if we can help you in any way, please come forward together as we stand and as we sing.
Have you been to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you